Thank you, guys. Good morning. Thanks for inviting me and for having me today. In case not everybody knows what an anthropologist is, we study culture and human behavior. The reason why anthropologists and ethnographers, in this case, have become so popular in marketing is because a lot of brands have realized the importance of understanding people in a context. Precisely that's the topic of this talk today, which I called, sorry, you can't see properly, it's called Sense-Making of Culture, Human Solutions to Business Problems. And that's precisely what I'm going to address, a number of business cases that my clients have briefed me on, the way in which I have approached these problems, and then I will give you some background to what I do and where I come from. If you use Twitter, feel free to tweet at Marcela_Ospina. I hope you enjoy it. So I would like to start with a quote by one of the most popular anthropologists of this century. His name is Clifford Geertz. And he says, the function of culture is to impose meaning on the world and make it understandable. The role of anthropologists is to try to interpret the guiding symbols of each culture. By symbols, he means paraphernalia around culture, the daily life, our daily experiences, the way we interact with others. I think in modern lives, social media, the way we interact with communication platforms, and basically all our interactions with one another. I think there is two sides to study culture. In this case, the one is anthropology, which is the understanding of culture as a whole, how humans shape it, experience it, and transform it. You're going to hear me saying a lot and referring a lot to the way humans experience something because it is at the core of my work. And then the second part would be digital strategy, but I think it can expand to direct marketing and to other kinds of marketing. I refer to digital strategy because it is what the application, the main application of my work, but it's not exclusive to this. And basically what it does is it answers business problems in a realm from a human insight. So the one part is gathering how humans experience reality and brands and products, and the other part is basically answering business problems from that human insight. Therefore, effective marketing is that which is supported by actionable insights and strategies aimed at behavior change, which align with culture and context. What this means is basically that human behavior is not static. In general, with marketing, a lot of my briefs consist in making people to engage with a campaign, to post a message on Facebook, from simple things like posting a message to more complicated things like subscribing themselves to a competition. But if you look at all your marketing briefs, they all have some sort of behavior change underlying. Whether that's fundamental or not is not as important as there is some kind of activity that is required from customers and from consumers. So that is also a fundamental part of what I do, understanding that behavior is not static, that is constantly changing. Therefore, the connection is creating action through an understanding of behavior shifts in a particular context. So because behavior is constantly changing, and sometimes those changes are quite drastic, it is easier to understand them in a context. I'll give you an example. In the 90s, the sports industry started reformulating itself. And they started realizing that sports weren't so much about performance and about succeeding, but was more about the lifestyle. They were more about self-realization. And then things like yoga became top of the mind of people, whereas before it would be like, I'm not going to design sports shoes for someone who does yoga. It doesn't make sense. What I would like to explain is that these changes seem obvious to us in retrospective. But when they're happening, we feel intuitively, we have a hunch that there may be something changing, but we're not fully aware of that change. Part of my job is to make my clients aware of that change sometimes before it happens, or while it happens, but it's not obvious to everyone. And I think that is quite key to effective marketing that prompts behavior change in people. This is a little bit about the jargon that I have heard in the industry. And all I want to show is how these terms we take for granted and we assume everybody knows them. And I think because we use them so much, they start losing meaning. The one is customer experience, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. The other one is brand building. And then this one, which really, really puzzles me, is creating value, because it has become such a common sense. It has become something that all clients want to do. But in reality, what's the substance of it? Like, how are you adding value? It can mean anything. So I think it is important when you do this kind of work to go back to these terms, to go back to what is at the base of your marketing strategy, and look at what this really means to my client and what this really means to people, more importantly. This is a little bit of the bad examples I have seen recently, so that you can see what I mean by that. I don't know if we all familiar with this consulting firm. They called 80/20. They're based in Cape Town. They basically aggregate different research sources in one sort of database. They're quite well known. I've worked with them and they're quite good. However, last year something happens with data they interpreted. I wouldn't say wrong. I would just say they interpreted out of context. The finding read, low-income South Africans spend more money on clothes than on health and education. Did you guys hear this? Did you hear it in the news last year? Okay, anyway. It had a lot of criticism because, of course, when you publish a finding like this, you question a lot of things. How can that be? Are you saying that people in South Africa are materialistic? Are you saying that people at the bottom of the pyramid can't, like, they only think about getting clothes and they don't want to get educated? So anyway, there was an agency called Organization for Africa or something like that. They questioned 80/20, and they questioned, why are you saying this? What is the context of this statement? And basically what they had to say to that was that they must buy the report. So they didn't do anything to correct their finding or to give some context into the finding. I don't think me explaining what they meant, I can, but that is not really important part of this exercise. I think the fundamental part is that they did not see the finding in a context. And the context that they forgot was the fact that these people maybe have health and education subsidized and therefore don't need that money, and that money can go to spending it on clothes. The other thing that I didn't bother explaining was the fact that people at the top of the pyramid spend less on these things because their income is higher. So there were a lot of inconsistencies. And what I'm trying to point out here is that you read a finding like this, and if you're not educated enough, or if you don't have a background into South African culture, it can be hugely misunderstood. My next example is international. It's a company called Amy's Baking Company, and they were invited by Ramsay's, the show, the cooking show. Basically what happened is that he was trying to help them. Their business was doing horribly, and he was trying just to get their business up and running. And within, I think it was 24 to 48 hours, he fired them, because these people were basically treating everybody badly, from their customers to their staff. So Ramsay said, I'm not having you anymore in my show, goodbye. And as opposed to these people, and in this way, similar to the previous example, as opposed of them taking this in and doing some sort of reputation management strategy, they went on Facebook and they went onto a Facebook rant to say, and even religious, to say, you don't know us, we will thrive, we will overcome, we are starting our family, and we will teach our child exactly what God wants. So, I mean, and you can only imagine what this did to these people's business. I mean, eventually the social media will hate them. Their reaction was appalling. Ramsay didn't want to hear about them. Obviously, this is quite extreme. But what I'm trying to show with these two examples is things that could be course corrected. It's things that you could give some context to, that you could almost take a distance from your brand, take a distance from yourself, and look at something as people experience it, as opposed to from your own perspective. So let's look at how will I do it. So my approach is holistic, and by that I mean two basic currents of thinking. The one I call the humanities, because I'm an anthropologist and the main method I use to source this knowledge is ethnography. I'm going to focus on ethnography, but it's not exclusive to it. There are other methods, so, psychology is widely used, literature, philosophy, amongst others. And basically what it means is spending time understanding the unsaid, the context and individuals' interaction with their own environment. And this is something really difficult to do sometimes because in corporate you don't get given enough budget, or you don't have enough time, or people won't just let you into their houses as easily. But as much as I can, what I try and do is to immerse myself into the lives of other people, whereas that is by doing things I wouldn't conventionally do. And I will show you examples of what I've done recently. Or whereas that means just reading about things that I also wouldn't read, or trying to just act as if I'm someone else that I'm not. And then the other current of thinking is hard sciences. And I'm sure we all have heard this over and over again. Big data falls into that. And it's a current of thinking that marketers, I think, have quickly adopted without really criticizing or taking some sort of perspective on what it really adds to innovation, what it really adds to product development. I'm not saying is, that you need to prioritize the one over the other. I'm just saying that big data is not the solution for everything. It's not going to give you all the answers. And because it misses a lot of these things that people don't say, that people can't articulate, that are part of culture and therefore are invisible to data. So I think if you go the route of humanities and if you go the route of understanding what people don't say, there are three elements to consider. The one is that we all have cultural imprints. And by this I mean we're all born with this sort of DNA of who we are culturally. This doesn't mean that we can change behaviors, but imprints are really hard to change. They're almost subconscious. The second element to consider is a behavior shift, so the fact that behavior is going to change over time. And the third element to consider, and I think this is huge for us as marketers, is that behavior can be triggered, that behavior can be changed, that if you do an effective marketing strategy, ideally should trigger a behavior. And if you're not doing that, then you need to question what you're doing. How have I done it? So there's a few examples. I will start for one I did 3 years ago in 5 African countries, including Ghana, Nigeria, Zambia, Tanzania, Kenya. That's it. And basically the goal of the research was to understand cultural nuances in these markets because the client wanted to launch an overall mobile strategy for them. And we knew some general facts, like the fact that they are mobile, but we didn't know to what extent they really use social networks or to what extent mobile plays a role into their lives. So what I did, and again, this I could have not done with data gathering conventionally. What I did was just went into each of these markets and I spent some time with my client and then some time in my client's market. And then it was a very alcoholic beverages company. And then some other time I just spent just trying to understand who they were. And these were the two things that I found interesting. There's more, but these I would say are the main ones. The one was their context, and the other one was their individual experiences. In terms of their context, my realization was that the circumstances at their present went at a different pace than the technology they were adopting. In other words, if you find people in a semi-rural area using Facebook, Facebook is pushing sort of their use of technology, but their present and current circumstances could be very precarious. Like, so they sometimes don't have running water, and sometimes, and what was really funny is that they never have electricity. So they always have to have how do you call them? Generators. So electricity is an issue, and they usually had multiple devices, multiple batteries. So what I'm trying to say is there was a discourse in the context that said, hey, like there's a future arriving, use this next device, use 2 SIM card devices, go for this. And at the same time, there is an individual experience discourse that goes at a much slower pace than that. And I think the understanding of these 2 realities was one of the main findings, because any kind of effective marketing strategy that we were going to do had to address the fact that no matter how quickly you want to push a culture or how quickly you want to make someone act in a certain way, if the shift is not happening yet, it's just not going to happen. So, and the strategy rolled out, and one of the things that it did for them was the fact that because of this whole pushing them to be, in the future, to be technologically advanced, they had like this very strong sense of improving themselves. So they really wanted to be entrepreneurs, they really wanted to learn about business, they were really interested in opening up a shop. So the strategy focused on that. And it had a huge teaching component of like, how do we make these people's lives better? And that's how it rolled out. This is another example. It's quite interesting. It's also international. It's not mine. It is from this behavioral economics called Daniel Ariely. And basically, he was explaining why in some countries in Europe, some people don't donate organs, and some other countries have high organ donation rates. Basically, the explanation is really funny because these countries are really similar culturally. So politically, they are aligned. Economically, they are aligned. However, there was no like an obvious explanation of why in some countries people donated more than in others. So basically, he realized that they had been given 2 forms. In the one form, they had given the option of opting out if they didn't want to donate organs. In the other form, they had given the option of opting in if they wanted to donate organs. In both forms, they left the space blank. So there was no action, there was no behavior change. They just left it blank. But the behavior change consisted in the people who designed the forms, because they designed it in such a way that people will, by not ticking in the box, they will donate organs. So that goes in line with my next example, which is an organ donation campaign in which I participated last year. I did not design it. I did not directly impact the campaign, but I was in the agency that executed it. The campaign is called Exchange, and basically the goal of the campaign was to get people to donate more organs. The insight was that people want to donate their organs, but don't know how, and it's not accessible to them. So it's not easy for me to go and donate my organs. And the execution was to ask fashion designers to donate clothes. So we opened up a shop in Cape Town. Fashion designers donated clothes, and customers just went for the clothes, got an item of clothes for free in exchange of subscribing themselves to donating their organs. And the campaign, even though it was anchored in a physical space, it lived in an online space with tweets and blogs and etc. And the results were 759 items sold, 5,313 lives saved. The investment was less than 20,000 rand, and they got 4.5 million in free PR. So this is like a really good example of a campaign that starts with like a very deep human insight that is not very obvious and that can roll out as something really powerful and not even that expensive. The other example, and this one goes more in line with what Robin was saying about segmenting audiences and profiling. This one we did for House with MSN when I was at Native. Basically, the brief was to understand their audience from a behavioral point of view. So they wanted to understand what would make people engage with what kind of content in their site. Like they had a fair understanding of people are aged from 30 to whatever, but we want to, like the brief was, we want to understand what makes these people tick. So what I suggested was also a cultural project in which I would take a sample that was given to me by the client because they segmented their own audience quantitatively. So I took that quantitative information and took a very small sample from there, like 20, 25 people. So it wasn't a big sample, but it wasn't needed for what I needed. And different kinds of users. So I went into each one of their houses, and I followed them around a little. And basically, I was looking at a number of things. I was looking at the way they consume media. I was looking at the way they follow things on Facebook or on Twitter. I was looking at things they do in their spare time as well. And in general, I was just kind of getting to a whole picture of who these people were. And then we identified key behavior drivers for them to engage with content. So the application was a redesign of the MSN site as per segmented audiences and new content to be launched as per behavior drivers. So this is also quite a good example of how you can understand audience, of how you can use data in order to understand culture and not necessarily say, I'm just going to go quantitatively and I'm not going to look at this. So I think if you guys have any of these sorts of projects, it is possible. Then one of my most recent projects is for PayU. They are an electronic and mobile platform to make payments. The brief was quite huge because, as some of you may know, people in Africa pay cash, and mobile payments have only really taken off in Kenya and Tanzania maybe, but in Nigeria, which is the biggest market, it hasn't. And in South Africa, it's taking off, but very slowly. So I knew I wasn't going to sort out such a big question, so I didn't. So I just basically focused on a question that to me made more sense. And that question was, what are people doing with cash? What is it behind paying cash that people like? And what is it that we can give them that sort of resembles paying cash? So this I didn't know before. It seems obvious to me now, but I didn't. I started seeing these very long queues outside Pep stores, ShopRite stores, Checker stores at the end of the month, but very long. And then I started standing in the queues and following people and asking them questions. And what happens is that these people, this is called money market. And these people are basically sending and receiving money. Sometimes they send, sometimes they receive. And they pay 9.9 Rand every time they do this, which according to them is very cheap. So the human insight, amongst others, that I realized was that cash was transacted within tight networks of people. So between me and my grandmother, between me and my cousin, between me and my nephew. And in this sense, payment methods adoption depended on the recipients as well as the senders' access to technology. And by this I mean if the grandmother couldn't walk to a bank, she wouldn't. Or if she doesn't use a smartphone, it doesn't matter how young I am and it doesn't matter how clued up I am. If the receiver at the other end is not as clued up, it's not going to happen. So basically, one of the recommendations was an execution to focus on the generational divide in the adoption of electronic payments, targeting influencers of behaviors and retailers where cash is transacted. So the strategy had a huge focus on retail as well. And it is still, it's ongoing, so I can't show you like an execution, but it is going to be rolled out here, and hopefully, if Ebola doesn't attack the rest of Nigeria, I'll be going there. There is this very nice campaign which has a corporate responsibility angle, in case you guys work with any of these. It's called Choma, and basically it is a mobile application. We got a brief from an NGO sponsored by Charlize Theron, which is called HIVSA. And they basically knew they wanted to engage they wanted to engage teenagers at risk of contracting HIV/AIDS, but they did not want to talk about health. So they wanted to engage them with like a mobile platform that spoke about lifestyle. And obviously, being a digital agency, we took a step back and we were like, content by itself is not going to really change behavior. Like, because you read a magazine, how are you going to change? How's that a trigger for behavior change? So we went into these communities of people at risk, And one of the main findings was that these girls had a very rough life. Like a lot of them grow up with single moms. A lot of them are single moms as well. A lot of them have heard of stories of rape very close to them. And a lot of them want to study, and they say to you, I'm going to study, I'm going to do this, but yet they have no clue how they're going to do that. So they were quite big things. And one of the main insights that we gathered was that these girls didn't have anyone to talk to about these things. And that the archetype for talking about these things with was a sister. So we developed a whole campaign, which was eventually a magazine, but it was also a game, a mobile game, in relevant social platforms. And we basically engaged them with content of all sorts, but also with quizzes, of asking questions of what would you if, and a lot of stuff about relationships. So the campaign was rolled on Mixed because at that time, and because of the age group, which was 14 to 20, it seemed to make sense. But with the projection of this changing as people use Mixed less. And the results were constant engagement by boys and girls, which wasn't expected because the campaign was just targeting girls, and 1,689 users in December, which was fairly high. And this is my last case study, and it's a video. It was for Colgate Optic White. They were launching last year, 2 years ago in South Africa. The brief they gave us was quite skewed internationally, so we didn't have a lot of creative scope. But what we did have a scope to do was to adapt a brief that was so international to a local reality. And the international basically said we must position Colgate Optic White as a fashion brand, and as opposed to a health care brand, and that basically the brief for the campaign is wear a smile. And our cultural insight was that people want to broadcast their lives. People want to show that what they're doing and want to document their reality. And we leveraged on selfies for people to take of themselves, girls in this case, and then we opened the competition for them to be on the cover of Cosmo magazine. And you can't imagine the results, and I'll show you.
Colgate Optic White promises whiter teeth in just 1 week. And this means a more beautiful smile. So to launch Optic White into the South African market, we took a whole new approach to toothpaste. We turned it into the ultimate beauty product. We partnered with Cosmopolitan magazine and gave women a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be a Cosmo cover girl. All they had to do was wear a smile. News of the competition reached over 420,000 people on Twitter, and immediately entries started pouring in, some even entering as many as 50 times. Women simply had to upload a photo of themselves wearing a smile. Every photo and comment not only created content on the blog, but because users were able to share their submissions on social media, awareness of the competition increased too. Wear a Smile TV webisodes and an engaging blog gave women valuable beauty tips and advice on fashion, relationships, and how to boost confidence.
Don't try the Magnum PR thing, and the fist and push into your face.
You gotta think of something that makes your eyes sparkle. Okay, like this.
With a target of 2,000 entries, the campaign soon exceeded expectations. Finalists were flown up to Johannesburg for a photo shoot for the Optic White blog, Wear a Smile TV, and 2 double-page spreads in Cosmo.
Well, I'd totally be excited. Being on Cosmopolitan cover page would be like, yay!
It's an opportunity that I'd like to hopefully win.
It was then up to them to get the votes to ensure their victory. They took to social media and put on their best smiles.
I think I have a good chance of winning. That's if all my voters actually voted.
Vote for me because I'd love to be on the cover of Cosmo.
Vote for me because you're going to be seeing this beautiful smile everywhere.
With a target of just over 5,000 unique blog views, we got over 29,000 and were exposed to more than 7.5 million Twitter accounts. Colgate Optic White was able to forge deeper, more meaningful conversations with South African women, giving Colgate Optic White a reason to smile as well.
Thank you, Colgate. It's amazing.
I would like to end with a quote from the CEO of Snapchat. Do we all know what a Snapchat is? A mobile platform taking over from WhatsApp in the States, where our media disappears instantly, which to me is one of the biggest cultural shifts that we are undergoing currently. And basically he said something quite meaningful, which I use all the time for my work, and is that the app is changing the way people consume media and communicate with one another, and ultimately transforming the way individuals build their identity. So I want to leave you with this, like how are we building our identity, how are we changing the way we talk about ourselves, as opposed to going back to a photo album. We don't have media to go back to anymore if media is bound to disappear every 2 seconds. So how are we going to write about history, and how are we going to write about ourselves? And that to me is a very important cultural shift. Thank you. Any questions? I think the whole point of the trend is that people want to broadcast their life and write their narrative about their identity instantly. And you can do that over email. So you do that with microblogging. So Twitter is a good platform. And of course, something like a Snapchat is ideal because you're uploading and media is just disappearing. So you're constantly recreating the way in which you share media. So definitely. But I think for people, for older people, and the more I spend time with people, the more I see that we long for other things, that other platforms are more relevant, and that actually whether it's microblogging or not is not as relevant. No, I have read a lot about it, and the strategy is more like they're going to become more and more like a media, like an advertiser, like a place where you advertise. Surprisingly, in South Africa, is incredibly popular and incredibly effective. Almost in all my campaigns, I have a Facebook component because it's just the reach is so high, but also the kind of people. The way they use it is so sophisticated. Like I've seen people that run like a very tiny business in a township, and all they do is to roll a strategy that rolls on Facebook. So they run businesses with these. So it's so sophisticated that I don't see it going away anytime soon in this market. I think overseas and in the States, definitely not, because of the age group. So, and also because of the way we're consuming media and because of what we just said. But in this market, definitely not going away anytime soon. Not yet. Even though people complain about it, but yeah. Yeah, sometimes, like one of the things that concerned me the most was the international alignment. Sometimes I got a brief for a brand, also a healthcare brand, and they wanted to align to fatherhood in Brazil. And I'm from South America, and fatherhood in South America is different from fatherhood in Africa. And so my approach, they gave me a very small budget to do my bit, but I was doing strategy as well. And my approach was completely local, and I took like elements of popular culture and like the fact that a lot of people grow up without fathers, and it is a reality. And they didn't like it, and they didn't launch it because it was unhappy, because it's not like an upbeat reality, but it was the truth. And a lot of children here grow up without their parents, and a lot of them grow up with single moms. So the dad is almost like their moms. So what do you do there? You see, it's almost like the reality is so harsh that how do you align that? So yes, to answer your questions, I do find it sometimes, and sometimes I have to compromise according to whatever the brief is. But as much as I can, I don't compromise. I do tell the truth. Well, my first advice would be to leave the office. It will be to go for a day and spend time being a consumer. That would be my first advice. The second advice would be to look at everything, not to constrain my worldview to either data or analytics, or this has to be Facebook and nothing else. I would never segment per channel. I would be channel agnostic and just basically look at, this is a cultural trend, this is where the need is, this is what it could do for my brand, and then focus on that. And where the campaign leads me towards digital or it leads me towards direct marketing or whatever the intervention is, I will just look at the bigger picture. And then I think the third would be, and it's gonna sound funny, but it would be doing this exercise, these conversations, these forums, this dialogue, reading as much as you can. Like in this kind of work that I do, I think I read out everything. And I'm not that young, and I think I also DJ, and like I go to places with very young people, and I learn from those things. I don't like it because I'm the oldest, but it does give me a different view of the world, and I think it's really important.